have three different presenters. Okay, there we go. So for the day, you'll have three different presenters. Myself will just do the intro. Then Tinesh and Stephen, as Ridwan has mentioned, will join and give us really the meat for the session that we're going to then go through, right? What we would like to do today is talk about budgeting, but not budgeting as the complete process. It's budgeting, we'll talk about the process, but here we want to have a bit of a focus on the monitoring of the budget, which is your forecast versus your actuals and how to manage that process. So we're going to go in a bit more detail into that aspect. Then we will touch on the financial statements, preparing for those financial statements. And then we'll also talk about how to actually approach the communication of those financials. Again, prepared for communicating them to the board, communicating them to the parents, and making sure that all the different stakeholders have a good understanding of the school's financial position, and using this opportunity to attract the type of stakeholders that you want to support where the school is trying to get to, right? So we'll talk a little bit about that as we go through. So that's the plan for this session, right? If we touch on where we are in the series, you'll see there's quite of an agenda as we go across that is planned as part of this series. We have done the first one, and of the first one, we are here on the second one, and these are the topics that I've just mentioned with regards to what will then unfold, right? There are some then planned later on. Again, we will adjust accordingly depending on how things move, but we are here at the moment, right? So I just want to mention that the series really, I think, to Ridwan, the comment he made earlier around trying to find money so we can hire more teachers. I think the series is meant to provide or fill in the gaps. We're aware that every principal or every part of the school management team is experienced, knows how to manage the financials that are required for the school. What we're trying to do is close the gaps that can really enhance how the management team of the school better uses the financials that they have available, or navigate how to improve the financials for the school so that they can keep doing the great work that they're doing. So that's sort of the purpose of this series. Now, having gone through that, any questions before we get in, before I introduce our first speaker? Any questions on why we're doing this, what expectations there are? I think the key thing for this session is really that budget monitoring process, financials, and using the opportunity whenever we're engaging, whether it's with the school board, the parents, or other stakeholders that can support the school in the community, using that opportunity to keep advancing the school's agenda objectives. Any questions? I see there's some messages in the chat. Okay, see that. Yeah, any questions? Like I said, I hope this is interactive, so please feel free to ask questions where you don't understand, or give a comment or share your experiences with us or with the team. Okay. If there aren't any questions, Tinesh, are you ready for us to go?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I'll be taking you through this budget process summary here. However, I think I want to make it interactive, so I think if there's any comments or questions along the way, please feel free to unmute or message in the chat. And if we can't answer, I think we'll put in the parking lot, and definitely, feedback to the group later on. So, as we mentioned with Ridwan, there's we need more money. There's other comment, need more money for more teachers. So I think we'll park that question when I get to phase 4 of the right hand side of my slide. So I think high level, the budget process summary has 4 phases, and I'm not sure if this is known to you guys, but phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, and phase 4. So phase 1 is drafting the budget, phase 2 approvals, and phase 4 the monitoring and control. So for me, I think the first critical part is drafting the budget. And drafting the budget is, I mean, need to have foresight of what's to come, and yes, the future is very unknown, as always. But there's certain sort of events that we need to take into account in drafting the budget. And that could be something that happened during the current year, whether there's an increase in ESCOM's tariffs or resignation of teachers, your future recruitment of teachers, etc. So I think it's really important when we're drafting the budget to take your current economic conditions into account and also consider the predictable of events. So as Ridwan says that we need more teachers, right? So if we sort of put that in the budget now, when we're drafting it and say we need 5 more teachers at X amount of rand, that needs to go into the budget because it's a predictable event and something that we need immediately, right? Going forward. So that's something that we need to sort of add in drafting the budget and not later on where the government or council will come and say, oh, but this was not accounted for. So that's very important to, so predictable events and current economic conditions need to be taken into consideration. And through our research, we've also picked up that there is guidelines from the MEC that needs to be taken, which I don't have too many details about, but I'm sure that there is some sort of guide that schools need to consider. So I think it's important for the schools and principals to sort of ensure that those guidelines are met. The don'ts of drafting a budget, I think, do not use the same prior amounts because I think we sometimes as humans be lazy and then just copy and paste last year's numbers and put it into the budget for next year. And assumptions is probably, I say do not make assumptions, but sometimes we have to. But use assumptions based on, as I said, current economic conditions, what happened in the current year or the prior year, and predict the growth rates for that. So, as I said, using my example earlier, we need 5 more teachers. What percentage increases that on our current, staff cost? And we'll add that in. Is there any question with regards to phase 1 and drafting the budget? No, I see. Quiet. Okay. Phase 2, approvals. Approvals need to happen nonetheless. So I'm not going to even dive into that. Approvals by by the SGB and during the AGM. So once they're approved, the budgets are locked in. Then we get to the meaty bits. As the year starts, month 1 completed, then we have actual figures. So I'm not sure what the practice is or how many of us do this, but how often do we sit back and say, January has passed? Have we looked back and said, budget for January said X amount, our actual for the month said X amount? That is the most critical thing of budgeting. And if we don't do that, we won't able to sort of have foresight for the next month, right? So look at January. Okay. January, we said we spent 10 Rand. The actual is 12 Rand. What happened? That sort of investigation or that deep dive into a line item sort of will give us further insight of to where our outliers are. Did we budget incorrectly when we did the drafting of the budget? Maybe, maybe not. Maybe there's some ad hoc event that took place during the month of January. So we need per school, obviously the needs and the operations are different, but per school we need to identify sort of performance indicators, which would then flag and say, okay, should this amount kick out by X amount of Rand or X amount of percentage, we need to sort of investigate that line. So Ridwan will have employed 5 teachers in January, but that's predictable, right? Because we've already put that in the budget. But now it's out by one more percent. Maybe Ridwan during the month employed 1 more teacher, so 6 teachers. So that is an outlier, but it was predictable, right? But sort of we need to sort of use performance indicators, and this will be different from school to school, to flag in line items that we are concerned about. Then the other part is the capex and cash budgets, which I should have touched on earlier, is that we need to run sort of 2 budgets side by side. One is cash budget, so that's your operational costs, and then your capex budget. That's your big hitting big hitting financial items such as desks, chairs, computer equipment, massive stationary bills. So I think the capex part of of budgeting needs to be considered when you're drafting the budget. So if I take a step back, we'll have to do capex budget and cash budgets, right? So cash budgets, day-to-day operations, and your capex budgets are your big hitting financial items. So capex budgets, obviously, you need to monitor on a monthly basis because you don't expect to be buying chairs and desk every month because then something is going horribly wrong, right? So I think capex budget also needs to have the same sort of behavior and monthly routines as your cash budgets. Any questions with regards to the differences between capex and cash budgets? Capex meaning capital expenditure. That's the short for capital expenditure. No questions? Okay. And also the same. I have the don'ts in the bottom of the screen says do not leave outliers without action plans for the following month. Komola, I see.
Hi, Tinesh. Maybe I'll get the ball rolling with questions.
Ah,
I see that you haven't included a phase 3. Are you just testing us to see if we are awake? Or is
it
there
could be
some
a
phase 3
typo.
that okay.
Typo.
Okay, no, perfect. So it's the first phase, 3 phases that you want the
4 phases.
you
So
want to
phase
understand.
2 and 3 will be the approvals. Yeah, I missed
Phase 2
to
and
type
3.
it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. I'm with you. Thanks, Tinesh.
Then
Hello.
yes.
Sorry, I can't raise my electronic hand. May I just ask on that phase 4, the second bulletin, create performance indicator to flag outliers on line items simply. Can you just maybe explain a bit there?
Okay. So if we're doing a cash budget on Excel, I suppose, right? And I'm use January, for example. In the school X, we'll put so line item will be staff costs, right? Staff cost, our budget was 10 Rand. And then we put that same column next to the actual amount of January, which is 12 Rand. And if we run a formula or we physically go through each item and say, okay, and put a formula and say, okay, why is this different by 2 Rand? So that's what I mean by create performance indicators. So that could be specific to a school, could be specific to, I don't know, the region or anything that sort of drives your cost or you're concerned about, maybe then flag into your budget, whether that's an Excel, if it's manually, or yeah, if that answers your question.
Yeah, maybe Tinesh, just to add to that, right? I guess here it's really where you try to not get over budget. You want to know before you get over budget. So you almost put almost like the speed limit, right? We know that if the speed limit is 120, you almost want something that tells you before you get to 120 that, hey, you might be going over the speed limit. So just be aware. So it's almost an indicator, and you can build them specific to the school. So if you have, for instance, consumables, and you have a budget for consumables for the school at 55,000, you almost create an indicator, something that will give a trigger at, say, 40,000 to say you only have 15,000 left for your consumables. Then you'll gauge whether are you close to month end, will you still be in your budget, do you need extra, do you not? It's there to help you make decisions before the risk happens, right,
Yeah.
of being over budget.
And the long term as well, right? So you're looking at month on month to add to Tsele, and then you stop it before it happens, as you said, as Tsele clearly indicated in terms of the speed limit being 120. So you sort of pull back.
Thank you, Sorted. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. So as is the last part of the slide in the bottom, it says the critical phase of budget process is phase 4. Successful budget monitoring reports provide the necessary information about the school's spending patterns that assist schools management to recognize and provide realistic forecasts of year-end under or overspends. So exactly to Cecilia's point is to, the speed limit is 120, is to make you aware of it and pull back. So, I mean, if something we can take offline and sort of do a very, Cecilia, I'm not sure our input in this if we can, but to a very, like a dummy Excel 5% threshold or 100 Rand threshold. I'm not sure if that's something we can look into later on in providing.
Sure, we can look at providing examples of that, or practical examples of that.
Yeah, I think an example, I'm sure everyone has access, and it's basic Excel that we can, put in, and you just plug in your numbers for your own monitoring purposes. I think it'll be quite helpful. You can just do basic formulas to sell and do a draft, a document for them.
Yeah. Just one point that I think is important. We talk about monitoring and control. And I think just as a general point is that it's not just for budgeting, right? A lot of the times that monitor and control is where the decision making happens. So it's actually a tool to inform decision making so that the management guides the school's progression in a way that is towards the objectives that have been set. So it's actually there to enable decision making. So it's quite a strong decision making tool, amongst many other decision making tools, and shouldn't be used retrospectively, right? You shouldn't look at it once you've spent and say what's the actual budget. It should be in a way that it, like to Nash's point, it should be triggers that help you make the decision before you go over the budget. Yeah, so go ahead.
Thanks, Cecilia. And I mean, this is not a perfect science. Budgeting in massive companies also not a perfect science. You will sort of estimate wrong, things will happen. So also, I think don't be hard on yourself, but this monitoring will really assist in controlling costs and prevent massive financial disasters from happening. I see there's a question. Okay, the monitoring template, I see guys comment will be a great idea. So definitely we will be working on that. So we can note. And I think the second question is for you, Cecilia. Yeah,
It's
I
okay,
think we
then
can.
responding in the chat. It's fine.
Okay.
Yes, I think Ridwan, we did record the last one. We can check our repository and see if we can make that available as well. Let's see, there's a comment there around the access to the previous session.
Okay, I think we can move on to the next slide, Cecilia.
Okay.
Okay, and I think now we get into a bit of the meaty stuff, the more intensive stuff where it all comes together. So as I said, the actuals. So your actual amounts need to find its place somewhere, right? And that's where then the left part says recording transaction and events. So everything that you've done during the year, spent on or income, needs to be recorded. I'm not sure in sort of the education sector whether the principals employ companies to prepare the financials. If someone can maybe give me some indication of that, of who sort of prepares your basic accounts on a monthly basis, on a yearly basis, so then I can then start driving this conversation. Does anyone can just give me an indication? Or does it depend on the school or the region? I'm not sure. Everyone, I see you unmuted.
Yeah, and I don't want to jump in when I want engagement from our youthful audience. Anybody would like to jump in and share with us? Okay, for the interest of time, schools normally have a bursar who normally prepares all the financial documents, and school also get visited by an auditing team from the department who make sure that everything, that all the checks and balances are in place. But at the end, when you come to financial documents, an independent auditor will then do the books, the annual financial documents. So yeah, but before you get there, the school, the bursar, and the team
So,
are responsible for that. Yeah.
okay. So I think it's important that there is some oversight before it reaches the auditors or any of that. I think it's important for the principal and management to have oversight of they are finance officers for monthly admin. Okay. I think it's important that the top management, meaning principal, SGB, has oversight of that. And it's important to have a complete set of financial records. So whether they're capturing from the bank statement into an Excel to draft the income statement, or from another set of records, that needs to be monitored, because I think having a complete set, and this is what we pick up as well, is completeness of financial information sometimes is a big issue in clients, it's everywhere. So people miss things. So a certain level of review needs to happen. So it's good that there is a process in place that someone records the financial information on a monthly basis. So I'm happy with that. But there has to be a review part, and whether that's implementing or getting someone that's with a neutral eye to look over the information to say, okay, compare the checks and balances from what you prepared to where's the source, that needs to be to take place. So when it's recorded, and the three big parts of annual financial statements is your income statement, balance sheet, and your cash flow statement. So your income statement basically will show you your financial health from a business operating activity perspective, day-to-day basis, and include non-cash items. So non-cash items, it will be a typical one is depreciation, which I think we should know, and where your cash flow statement has pure ins and outs of cash. So it sort of reflects the source of cash funding and outlines your outflows and your inflows. So your cash flow statement will be your actual that you'll use against, as I spoke earlier, against what you'll compare with your budget, all right? And then your balance sheet then shows you all your school's resources. That means your fixed assets and liabilities in a nutshell. Any questions on this before I move on? And then it's important to know the differences between the three of them, especially when the person or from management is reviewing the financial information before it reaches the auditors or the department or the SGB, that all the transactions are in the correct place. Then once the financials are prepped, I don't want to overstep the next session, but once the financials are prepped, your users are your SGB naturally, your donors and parents probably, Department of Education, and the school's auditors, which will probably be the AGSA that sends people down to the schools or the region. And using your actuals, once the financial statements are prepped and it's ready to sort of be viewed by the users on the right hand side, it's important to have an idea of what the numbers mean, right? What the numbers mean. We have these beautiful statements. We spend a lot of work and time putting them together. But what does it mean? So basically, your financial statements give you your financial health, your current financial health, and financial statements should have the prior year or 2 prior years of financial information on that statement. So what does that then inform you? So the three big things for me is profitability, liquidity, and solvency. So profitability will be your school generating a surplus or deficit. And you will look at that and look, okay, this year is a profit, last year was not a profit. That will sort of inform your decisions going forward to say, okay, what good did we do this year? Which cost did we then control? And if you look at your detailed income statement, which line compare line for line on the prior year versus the current year, which line, where did we save money? Okay, this year in January, Ridwan employed 5 more teachers, but actually we negotiated on security costs by 5%. So we got a saving there. So things like that we need to look at when it comes to profitability. Liquidity, does the school have sufficient cash to meet its short-term obligations? So that first thing we'll look at is sort of your bank balance. So we're okay, how much money do we have, at the end of the financial year? Is it enough, looking forward in terms of and then you look at your next year's budget. Okay, your budget is showing you this, but this year we're saying this is how much we have in the bank. We have a problem. Should we adjust our budget? This should inform our actions for budgeting and what we're doing going forward. And then solvency is your long-term obligations, which means your long-term loans, suppliers that sort of maybe you got long-term payment plans with. So that's something you can look at. Any questions? I mean, in the budget, in the budgeting template that we can assist in drafting, we can sort of add some financial ratios that may be relevant to a school, and then you can just plug in amounts there year on year to sort of give you an indication of, of your financial health. I don't know if that was something that can assist. Cecilia, I'm not sure if that's something we can build in the template, very basic template, but something that will help them.
We can look into it. I was going to add, speaking to how important it is to understand the financial health. I mean, in the news earlier in the year, I think it was around February, March, the Department of Education actually closed down, I think, a few universities because of financial solvency, right? Where they hadn't produced financials for a couple of years. They weren't able to demonstrate their ability to actually, I guess, manage a school in that regard. And that is the worst case scenario, where an institution that's supposed to provide education is then administratively closed because of inability to provide that type of information, right? So that's the worst case, but it's quite important to understand what this means for the school, for the important people, which is the students there, and also for the employees and the community at large. I think managing this aspect of knowing what it means and how to then take the next action is quite important for not just, for all the stakeholders you've pointed out in the top piece.
Yeah. And I think it's a rule for you to sort of provide your financial statements within 6 months after your year end, your school's year end. So it is, I think it's quite critical for a school, for a company. I'd say it's regulated and it's sort of mandated that we do that. And it's also for the own benefit of the school, right? Because that's the one point of contact or source of information that we have once the year has passed and everything is done, to look back and say, okay, what happened in the year? So it's quite important that those financial statements are actually prepared, because then it informs our budget, drafting as at phase 1, drafting the budget for the next year, and then also key decisions that we need to make financially or non-financially going forward. But I think I'll stop there. There was a question in terms of a template that we'll do. Will the template be able to import data from pastels? I think we will look at a very generic template that will be suitable for everyone. A manual template, just to sort of guide the process and help as a start. And then, I mean, later on we can develop something else. But this is a start to sort of supplement my discussion today. We'll look at a very, very brief template for the team.
Okay. Jerry. I see Jerry on the call. Do you have any comments with regards to how you manage this process at your school? Okay. Fatima, do you have any comments of how you guys manage this process at your school?
See, there's a comment on with regards to the slide in terms of the efficiency and effectiveness. Seems so fuzzy. Are there any ratios to determine it? Yeah, we'll look at that in terms of doing looking at financial ratios that say, okay, your fee income against your expenses, So as a percentage, how much of expenses are going against your income? So ratios like that we can sort of build in that's very specifically tailored for the education sector. And also the second part is cost control. Are the expenses being managed effectively so that we can build in to say, okay, month on month, what's happening, increase more than 5% could be something that needs to be looked at, etc. Example of KPIs, so key performance indicators. So as I said, that would be sort of school to school. Sort of your KPIs will be should an example is staff cost more than 50% of your tuition income for that. So Ridwan school, maybe he wants to put that in. That'll be his KPIs. Is it more than 50%? That'll be his key performance indicator, where it needs to be below 50%. So as I said, school to school will be depends on what costs you have and how you manage your funds. Kumala Pillai, I see your hand is up.
Thanks, Dinesh. Just going back a little bit to monitoring the budget. I see one of the people on the call, Adele, mentioned the 043 for monitoring. I wonder if Adele could explain a little bit more what that is.
I did not come across it. I don't know. So Cecilia has come across it, but I have not heard of that.
Okay. I think the question is to Adele to maybe just give some clarification on what the 043 is. Adele, are you still online with us?
Possibly she can't speak. I just think it'll be useful if there's something that the department has provided principles for monitoring purposes, and that could be a nice starting point for everyone to be exposed to that. And I know not everyone has the equal level of awareness of what the department has actually provided, because the communication is not always ideal. So if anyone on the call can help with what the department has provided for monitoring, that might be a better starting point than Deloitte preparing their own monitoring template. It might be a good idea to use what the department has provided. But if they haven't provided something, then absolutely, I think it would be fantastic if Deloitte can help everyone with a template.
Yeah. I mean, our research, we did pick up the R guidelines provided. I see someone's hand is up. Harold?
Yes, the 043 is something that must be completed every term and submitted to the district office. There's quite a few circulars. I can forward that to you at another stage.
Okay. Yes, 043 is used to capture terminal income and expenditure, not monthly expenditure. Okay. So I mean,
But what'll be fantastic though, right, is if you've got a system that does monthly, that automatically then allows you to report per term. to make
Yes.
everyone's life easier. You don't have to have two systems. You can have one system.
So the 043 is a form that I think maybe, Cecilia, if you can get your hands on it and forward it to us, and then we can look at,
Sure.
we can, changing it to make it monthly. Because then, as I said, if this is done on a termly basis, it's too late. Because you've already, a term is 3 months. It's already too late to pick up something. As I said, monthly monitoring is quite critical. It's quite critical.
I can jump in here, Tanet. The 043 is actually a cash book that captures your monthly income and expenditure. And then it generates a termly report, which the department's auditors then scrutinize to see where you are in terms of your budgeting, in terms if there are any risks in terms of overspending or maybe not have enough money in your account. So yeah, so we call it the 043, but I'm not sure about other provinces. I know it is used in the Western Cape. I cannot speak for other provinces, but I know the support given from the department is the sketch book called the 043. Also has templates for generating your new budget come the new financial year. So there is a template available that one can use to generate a budget. Yeah.
I think we don't maybe share with us. We'll just have a look at it to see exactly what's in there.
All right. I will try and find one of older year of school or my former school, and then maybe share that with you. All right.
Yeah.
Perfect.
I see a comment below to say, it depends from school to school. I know one of the comments we got from the previous session in one of the interviews is that there was a comment that we're waiting for the department to deploy Pastel or to give training on that. So it varies from school to school. And I think the uplift here is to say, while maybe we don't have the technological support, what can we be doing in the meantime to support that? But obviously the electronic part is where we want to be. But, thank you for that comment. Okay.
Well, I think with not to kill the last session, the time. Thank you, everyone, and thank you for listening in. And definitely we'll be in touch, and all the stuff that we promised, we'll work on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Tanesh.
Okay. Doing the last bit for this session. Any questions, any comments from the team? I know we've given quite a few comments in the comment section. Any last ones before we move on to the next part? Okay. Harold, I see your hand is still up. Is it an old one or a new one?
My hand is old, but I'm new. I just want to know, like the comment from Anthea Bartman there, will the presentation be shared? And I've missed the previous session. Will we also be able to get access to that, please? Thank you.
Yes, so as this is recorded, I think it's just a matter from a technicality of how do we share that. But yes, it is meant to be shared. We'll just figure out how to do that and make it available. Both this one and the previous one. Okay. Okay, Stephen, are you ready to go?
Yeah, let's go. So I think when it comes to financial statements, budgeting, I think one of the key things that we need to keep in mind is who are the different role players, and essentially for those role players, one, what is the role that these different parties play, and number two, what questions do they seek to answer by means of our financial statements or our budgets. And as discussed in the previous stint, we discussed the four main users of our financial statements, one being the SGB, two being auditors, three being our donors, and one being the Department of Education. And looking at these four main users of our financial statement, we can think about the type of questions that that concern them or the roles that they play. And starting with your auditors. So, as you do know, Deloitte is an auditing firm, so we're quite familiar with the sort of rationale behind doing financial audits. Two things are quite important. Number one, in doing financial reporting, there are standards that must be followed. Similarly, for schools, there are standards that must be followed that are specific to schools, whether those be public schools or whether those be private schools. And an auditor is one worried about whether or not you've used the proper reporting standards. Number two, your auditor is concerned about whether or not at the date in which you submit your financial statement, does it accurately reflect the financial position of the school? So for an auditor, those essentially are the two things that they worry most about. Are you reporting according to the standards? And does do the numbers reflect the position of the school at the time of the reporting? The second body that we need to worry about, and I think this one is quite an important one, especially if you look at a lot of the private schools who have a lot of donations that come from outside the school, from either alumni and so forth. Your donors are worried about two things. One, are you making proper use of the funds that they've provided? So if I'm a donor and I've provided R1 million, I want to sort of have a good idea of what is it that the school has done with my funds. And if you think about donors, these could also be parents who, through different initiatives to raise income for the school, whether that can be fundraising activities. If parents have raised funds through fundraising activities, they will likely be concerned to know what is it that we did with the funds that they've provided. And number two, I think the other thing that your donors probably want to think about is whether or not you need more funding. So if you think about, if they're looking at the financial viability of your school, is your school liquid enough? Do you have the money you need, or are there gaps? And if there are gaps, your donors are probably interested in knowing whether there are, in order for them to be able to assist. The third body, and I think as a regulatory body, this one is probably quite an important one for schools across the country, and that's that's the Department of Education. Now, as a regulatory body, this body looks at whether or not the school is being managed according to regulations, which is why your Department of Education, the role they play, quite similar to your auditors, ensuring that you are reporting accurately. But I think essentially, financial viability for the Department of Education is very important. It brings us to the point that Tisela made about the department closing down a couple of higher learning institutions over their inability to submit financial information. And in the absence of their inability to submit such information, the department cannot actually verify what the financial viability of these schools are. Now, though those were higher learning institutions, a similar principle does apply to schools. Can we prove to the Department of Education that our school is financially viable? And Tinesh made the point of profitability. Is the school profitable? And that might be less of a point for private schools for public schools as for private schools, but it's something that the department does tend to be interested in. The last body that is quite an important user is the SGB, and this being sort of internal and both external body. The SGB is worried about a couple of questions due to the fact that the SGB has a mandate that they need to perform, a regulatory mandate. One, the SGB is tasked with looking after the affairs of the schools, particularly the financial affairs of the schools, which is why they would want to make sure that, one, they're the financial practices are according to best practice. In other words, are we doing the things that an SGB should be doing, best practice? Number one, are they fulfilling all their regulatory requirements? In other words, are we reporting according to the financial standards that if the Department of Education or my auditors were to look at my reporting, would they be satisfied that I have done as per the regulatory requirements? And number two, important questions, if you're a member of the SGB, do we have enough funds? And this do we have enough funds question slightly, linked to not just your financial statement, but also your budget. What are the activities that we have planned for the year? And do we have the funds to fulfill those activities? And if not, what fundraising activities do we need? Or, in what ways can we raise funds? Now, I think in terms of the users of your financial statements, these are sort of the four main users per se. But I think it's important to keep in mind that you don't have just users. You also have other parties that are interested, one, two, affected. And those at the bottom there of our slide, your parents, for example, your teachers, for example, your students, for example. These parties, though not particularly users of your financial statements, what's in your financial statements does have an impact on them, their well-being, and how, that impact does sort of determine the decisions they make regarding your school and its financial position and what they need to do in terms of what's in their best interest, looking at what the financial situation of your school is. But basically, these are for your four main users of your financial statements. And just keep in mind that there are other informed stakeholders. But we want to take a particular look at teachers as a stakeholder. And we want to just take the next couple of minutes to discuss, if I'm a teacher or I'm a parent, no, rather not a teacher, I'm a parent, why would I be interested in the financial statements of a school, the budget of a school? What does it tell me? And how does it affect the decisions I need to make with regards to my children who might be attending at this school? So I think if we can just go to the next slide and just have a look at some of the questions that a parent might ask themselves around the school and the decisions that they would then make coming out of that. So I think as we've discussed in the previous slide, one of the ways that we might use to raise funds for our school might be, for fundraising activities where we involve parents. For example, my son's school, they sort of have the children, draw up a little painting, and then they have us as parents come and buy the paintings that our children have made. Initially that was a bit of a shortcut, say my child can paint and then I have to buy the painting. But it's a fundraising activity, and as parents we understand that there is a need for such activities. But as a parent, what I then want to know is what is being done with the extra money that the school has then raised. If I'm involved in those type of activities and we've raised 20,000 rand, do I know where my 20,000 rand went? And that's question number one. Number two, when I look at the activities that I think make a healthy school, I want my child to attend a school where there is track and field activities, where there is swimming lessons, where there is karate, whatever the case may be. As a parent, I'll be asking myself, looking at the financial standing of the school, does the school afford the activities that my child wants to attend? And that question obviously determines whether or not I think my child will sort of get this type of schooling, the balanced schooling that I think will be able to raise my child well, per se. The third question, if I'm a parent looking at the financial viability of your school, do I think this school in the next couple of years will still be here? In other words, is the school financially viable enough to maintain good levels of education, pay its teachers well, have all the extramural activities that my child will need for the next couple of years. And of course, this question, if I'm a parent, means essentially, should I keep my child in this school, or do I need to keep move my child to another school? So if I feel that the financial viability of the school is questionable, parents might start thinking about, whether or not they need to relocate their children to a place where they feel, one, the education is better, but the school is just much more stable looking at its financials. The last question that we can think about as a parent is, if I'm looking at the financial statements, is the school paying all its bills on time, and is it being managed properly? And this very similar to what your regulatory bodies, such as the Department of Education, will be looking at. This is quite an important one. But I think if I can summarize, these 4 questions, if I'm a parent and I'm looking at the financial statement or the budget of a school, I'm trying to determine whether or not my child is getting the type of education that is suitable, and whether or not in the next 2-3 years, before my child needs to matriculate here, so forth, do I believe that the type of this education will remain at its high standard? And those type of questions is, as principals, if you're a member of the SGB, when we draw up financial statements and budgets, for the different users of the financial statements, we need to think about the questions that they are trying to have answered. And how do we use the financial statement and the budget to put these users at ease, to let them know that everything is under control, and the numbers definitely help us to be able to do that. But I think in brief, when it comes to communicating of financial statements, those are some of the questions that parents might have. And the last one I just had as a question, perhaps from your experiences, being in this line of work for a long time, what else might parents be interested in knowing in terms of the financial well-being of a school? What else might parents be concerned about that we might be able to use, one, the budget or the financial statements, to put them at ease and let them know that their children are in good hands and that we have everything covered? I don't know if maybe we can have a volunteer who can maybe just give us, a view in terms of what else they think parents might be interested in, for their kids' future. I see a question there on the chat. Let me just go to it. And the question says, how can this well-being reduce my fees? And I think maybe, Tesela, also, if you can step in here, I think if I'm a parent, definitely looking at the financial well-being of my child's school, if the school that does tend to generate a lot more than it needs, then that might be a question that the school needs to look at, whether or not they can reduce the financial burden that parents have, due to the fact that the school is financially viable, and perhaps has reserves of cash for the next couple of years.
I see Kamala has also added in there the opposite of, or the inverse of that point, right? And I think to that, it's how does the school being financially stable, how does that attract the type of education that we want for the kids, or the stability that we want in there? And we know the community, even members that want to donate, participate in uplifting the school, they also want to know where it's going, how it's managed, and to ensure that whatever contribution they may make, it will be managed well. And this might be someone saying, I like what you've been doing. We would like to add to the good story that you're doing. If you're able to demonstrate on a continuous basis, long term, that you are able to manage the school and really improve the children's education in that sense. So I like both questions in terms of the inverse of that.
Yeah, 100%. And I think I also, in terms of this question about how can the financial well-being lead to a better education for my child? And you know, I'm thinking about some of the schools that I've attended, you know, in my youth. You know, you do have, you know, in this country schools where the teacher perhaps may leave and you're not able to attract another teacher for months on end. If I'm a parent and I'm looking at whether or not you're paying your teachers on time, and we notice that the school isn't financially viable enough to afford school fees, as an example, I might be thinking to myself, will my child have a math teacher throughout, you know, the rest of their year? And the better financial the when a school is financially well, has a good financial well-being, it reassures parents that their child has a good future here. They will have a teacher. The teacher will be in a good state because they're being paid well or being paid on time. And I think as a parent, that the financial well-being sort of reassures me that my child isn't going to be left stranded with no teachers around. I see another comment that says, unfortunately, not in poor communities. Yes, it does encourage funders, but not parents. 100%, 100%. I think that's quite an important note to make. In some communities, we do know that in poorer communities, the parents aren't really interested in the financial well-being of the school. Usually those are schools that are funded by the government, and parents don't have to take out much. But I think when you move into schools where parents start having to make a contribution, and perhaps because it's coming from their own pockets, they start being a little bit more concerned about what's happening in the school. And I think, generally speaking, you know, whether it's schools or in business, when someone has financially invested in something, they are more likely to have an interest in the outcome. And that's, you know, in the more private schools, you do get parents who are a lot more interested. Two other comments. One says, I will use these points to mention to encourage parents to pay fees. 100%. I think reassure your parents that you're doing a good job in managing the financial well-being of the school, and that you need their assistance essentially to be able to deliver quality education to their kids. Without, you know, their paying of fees, the financial education of their children is at risk. Next comment says, better resources if you have finances can purchase ICT to integrate in teaching. I'm not sure what that comment sort of means. Maybe if we can have a voiceover, if maybe you can just explain slightly what you sort of mean.
No, I think it just means, you know, if you have more resources, you're able to do more. In this case, the example is you can then purchase ICT equipment that can improve teaching, or that can improve the education you then provide to that.
100%, 100%. And I think that's 100% true. And I think as leaders within the school, the schooling system, we want to ensure that we give quality education to the next generation. We want the regulatory bodies, the auditors, the Department of Education to know that we are using the right standards and we are reporting proper numbers that demonstrate where we are. We want our donors, we want our parents to be reassured that the money they give us is being put to good use. But I think the most important custodian, you know, though not a user of the financial statements or the budget, is the student. And all these other bodies are there to ensure that the student has the education that they need. And we need to think about our financial statements and our budgets as tools. These tools allow us to communicate to the rest of the world, to communicate to the different bodies what's happening within our schools. And the better the story, the better the future of the school eventually becomes when these bodies are assured that we are managing things properly and we are giving the best education that we can under the circumstances. But yeah, well, from my side, that's sort of what the discussion was. I don't know if there's any other questions that we sort of want to deal with in terms of not just the session that I've dealt with, but the entire session. I think we can open up the floor up for questions.
I know the session was planned for, I think, an hour, if I'm not wrong. And maybe we've run a little bit over. Any questions, comments before we close?
If I may to say, we've just popped the evaluation form in the chat.
Okay,
And would like
thank
to
you for that.
encourage all our participants to maybe just spend a few minutes thinking about what question they would possibly ask of us, just for clarity, or maybe a comment on how useful the session was, and then also to complete the Google form so that we can get proper feedback in terms of are we hitting the sweet spot and what is it that we need to do more to bring about greater awareness. Yeah.
Yeah. And Ridwan, just to echo that, right? Completing the form helps us tailor the message or tailor the content so that it's not generic, even though it is helpful, so that we do address the key points that maybe are burning points or burning topics from the principles. I think from my side, definitely there's a bigger audience from the first session to this session. So definitely grateful for that momentum. Thank you for attending and thank you for your time with us today. If there are any questions, please do reach out and where we can, we will address it. And if it's a generic enough topic that is addressed with one person, we will also distribute that to the wider group. I think where we were standing is we want to give as much benefit to yourselves as possible, and your engagement makes that possible. So thanks again for making the time. If you do have questions, please raise them. But to Ridwan's point, please fill in the form so that we also get some feedback and know how to improve the sessions of the content that we provide across this series. Thank you.
And it will be very useful and welcoming if some people are prepared to just to unmute themselves and maybe just share a comment or two, you know. They've been very quiet on the other side of the microphone. So would like to hear some more voices. Anybody prepared just to comment on the session thus far? Anything that you feel that you have been given a little gift of greater awareness this afternoon? We would like to hear them. We would welcome them. Anybody?
No, I just want to appreciate everyone and that the lessons and presentation was well prepared, sweet and short. And, you know, it goes a long way when it's like that. Unlike when you are bombarded with a lot of information at once, and at the end of the day, you cannot recall or rather relate to what has been presented. But I like it when it's like this, and I really appreciate, especially when it's visual. It was kept very sweet, and I was following all the way. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate that comment. Anybody else?
Ridwan, I see Harold's hand is up.
Harold?
I was
Harold.
actually trying to avoid this because I'm not an old voice, Ms. Pillay. But yes, I'm a math teacher. I'm not an accountant, but I'm forced to look at these things. And it's great to see how what I'm doing every day are fitting in with all the processes and why, understanding the why more than anything else. Thank you for that. Of course, as a math teacher, I would love to see those ratios.
Okay. Thank you for that, yes. Okay. Ridwan, happy to close.
Session? Yeah. Just to make sure that the last person must continue recording or stop the recording so we could have the Zoom. Depo, are you stopping the recording now? So in closing, everybody, huge thank you to the amazing A team from Deloitte, led by Tasele, Stephen, and Dinesh this afternoon. We are very grateful for your prep, for your sacrifice, and for sharing the platform with us and bringing about the greater awareness about financial matters. You know, we need to be prudent with every cent that comes